Hi, John Murphy of FPF Training. This presentation is on self-defense, the post-incident legal environment. We're recording this at the Mushin Range in Brookville, Ohio, the home of my friends James and Corey Cocking. And they're hosting me for a street encounter skills and tactics class. And I'll be back here next year sometime, probably about October. So, disclaimer up front. This is not a detailed discussion of self-defense law. This is not the ability, opportunity, jeopardy, immediacy that you might encounter in your concealed carry class, or Andrew Bronca's 5 pillars of self-defense you can read about in his book, The Law of Self-Defense. Up front, I will also state that geography matters greatly. Between jurisdictions, towns, villages, even states, terminology changes, the law changes. Be aware of the legal environment that you are passing through. This is not legal advice. Seek qualified, experienced counsel. I am not a trained lawyer. I am a well-informed layman. I've taken many classes, but I would not portray myself as being a legal expert in this regard. But I do have a good perspective on this. Caveats. At the end of the presentation, I will cite to you some very outlier examples of what can happen to you once you enter the legal system, the justice system. Take your pick. I want to impress upon you right now that the application of force, all the way from lethal force to pepper spray or a punch across the face, is viewed upon by the legal system very skeptically. And you will have to articulate and justify what you did and why you did it and where you learned how to do what you did. And a hat tip right now to Mas Ayub, CYA. Can you articulate? Can you authenticate? Remember though, outliers remain a thing. So what the presentation is, an introduction to the players and environment you can encounter after a self-defense situation. And this is a Sarlacc pick from Return of the Jedi, I think. Back in the day, it can become a soul-sucking, life-consuming exercise. And let's engage in a thought exercise, shall we? You have used deadly force, despite your best efforts, at deselection, deconfliction, departure. You have been forced to use lethal force in defense of your life or to defend yourself against serious bodily injury. The 911 call has been made. I cover this in the Street Encounter Skills and Tactics class. The police have arrived and stabilized the scene. You have claimed self-defense. You have issued a statement to the officers, and there's a strategy for this I discussed also in the class. You have been detained pursuant to this investigation. If you have been pulled over for a traffic stop, there's a time standard for that. If there's a smoking gun and a dead body on the floor, well, they're going to detain you until they determine that what you are saying is the truth, and it can be a period of time. From detention, you have been arrested. They have decided that, given the facts before them, that they're going to arrest you and charge you with homicide. Remember, homicide, someone is dead. Homo sapiens, side dead, and you are now being held accountable for what they perceive as a crime. Self-defense is merely a mitigating circumstance. Someone is still justifiable homicide is still a homicide. It just was mitigated by the fact it was justifiable. Well, now what? You have just stepped through the looking glass. I'm using Alice in Wonderland as an example. The things that you think you know might not necessarily be true. Everything will be twisted and distorted. You will meet the Mad Hatter, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and the Red Queen, all the characters that are represented by the people in the justice system. How we like to think of it? Well, we've got the Declaration and the Constitution and blind justice and the flag waving. How it's portrayed on TV? Well, we got Adam 12. I'm kind of dating myself here. Law and Order, LA Law, all these great television programs. How it really is. It is not going to be a pleasant experience. You are on trial for your freedom, in some states potentially on trial for your very life. We have an adversarial system in this country where both sides will agree to stipulated facts, and then they're going to have at each other, and there's going to be a lot of friction. All the while, you're sitting in that witness chair with everything that you've strived for your entire life at risk. Well, here's blind justice. Here's some reality. She has her consorts of personalities, politics, and agendas. If you don't think that has not always been a part of any kind of legal or justice system, I must disabuse you of that notion right now. How the law is applied, what is attributed to whom, and allocated against what cases, is all part of the legal system. Pretty straightforward. It's a flow chart. And down here at the very end, we have the crime, or in this case, the alleged crime, or as we know, our righteous act of self-defense. Police investigation, various detention, arrest, charges are filed, cases are built, a jury is convened, and off we go through the system. Our goal is to be kicked out of this system at every opportunity we can. Spat out of the Sarlacc pit, as it were. I want to act in absolute self-defense with the halo over my head of everything I did was absolutely justifiable. That is not necessarily a defense, however, when certain agendas are at play. Here is our adversarial system, and there is your self-defense claim. Here is your claim being subjected to extreme scrutiny. Everything you say can and will be used against you. Your 911 call will be entered as evidence. Your firearm, the ammunition you used, the training you undertook, all will come to that point, and it will go through that threshing machine. So here's the first player that we can expect to interact with in the system, and that will be the 911 dispatcher. This is your initial interface to the system. It will be evidence in the chain. What you say on that call is all going to be recorded, and it will be part of the evidentiary chain. You can expect a spectrum of competence with 911 dispatchers because they're people. And you can have brand new people, you can have very experienced people, you can have people that are still occupying that chair because they can't hire anybody else, and all points in between. Now that said, they are tested, they're held to professional standards. Still, there is going to be a spectrum of competence. And work environments may vary. You can have a very clean professional thing like this, or you can go to like a local sheriff's department, and it might not be quite so clean and tidy and orderly. The police. Up front, I will caveat this. Some of my best friends are law enforcement officers. And at any moment, I can go onto YouTube and witness acts of incredible valor and human compassion on the part of police officers. At the same time, they're people too. They are subject to their moods, and emotions in the moment. They can make mistakes. Sometimes they can act illegally. Because, well, the police, they're not a monolithic entity. Everyone talks about the police. Well, the police in Los Angeles are not the same as the sheriff's department in Roscommon County, Michigan. They are subject consequently to local variations, and they hire from the local communities. They are duty-bound to enforce the law. We, as armed citizens, what's our responsibility? To ourselves. Ideally, they will exercise great discretion in how they go about applying the law. I prefer the term peace officer much more than police officer. Here's the big secret. I kind of already alluded to it. Cops are people too. And here you have pretty much the whole spectrum of interaction with the community. In one frame, they've lost one of their fellow officers. Here they are making friends with the kid. There's someone's very proud to become an officer. But they're kind of like a box of chocolates. You really don't know what you're going to get to respond to your call. Think about this for a moment. That officer that comes to your call could be on the cell phone having an argument with his estranged wife over child visitation, and the radio goes. And he's got, I got a call. And he rolls. That can impact their emotional state. We got two types we're dealing with primarily: uniformed officers, the ones that will show up, first responders, and detectives. These are the people that used to wear the white shirt and the tie, but now it's like polos and and polo shirts and slacks. Leavened with leadership of a variety of types and forms. And remember that these local entities are responsible to who? The local elected officials. They're enforcing the policies that the local elected officials were elected to put into place. Uniformed officers. Here is our spectrum of competence. There are our first responders, the top officers responding to a school shooting, and I'm having a moment, I think it was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they rolled right into it. And as the officers were working through the problem, and they were talking, go, 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 and they were talking each other up, covering corners, and it was a thing of beauty. They rolled right through it. These other officers, well, they failed their community dramatically. The quality spread. I just discussed it. Trained to a standard that has been determined by their agency or department. Some departments are rather low. They've got some very easy marksmanship standards, for instance. When you think about it, there's only so many hours to train and still patrol. There are so many topics: traffic law, criminal law, civil law, psychology, de-escalation, escalation. There's only so much they can do because they're people too. Masters of chaos. When I have an experienced officer in a class, and I will say this right now, if you have a police officer attending private instruction, they are definitely the exception because they're seeking more knowledge. Inevitably, they're very calm, cool, collected people because they've been in so many stressful situations that they have a very unique perspective on what's important. And they will get control of a situation. You sit down, you get cuffed, you come here and talk to me, bam, 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 bam. Their initial problem will be to secure the scene. And they may be rather abrupt in doing so. Be prepared for that. They will collect evidence. And this will be they'll take basic initial statements and to prepare things for the detectives to come and do the full investigation. And there are stereotypes of cops. There are maybe grains of truth. The police officers I have known have been rather rough and abrupt human beings when they're on the job, and I've seen them also very mellow and cool. They've got a sense of humor that has evolved over time to lessen the impact of their daily existence. People talk about trauma. In any given life, I'm told, there are usually 6 or 7 truly traumatic events. Think about the course of a 25-year career in a patrol car. The car accidents, the domestic violence, the shootings, the beatings, the knifings, the stabbings. Human beings will erect defense mechanisms against that. And to the uninitiated, well, it can be rather unsettling. Here come the detectives. These are the guys. Formerly, they would have 10, 15 years in an agency. Anymore, with the turnover, you might have 4 and 5 year detectives. They've seen some things. They're students of humans and the human condition. They understand patterns of behavior. They understand stress. They understand crime. They have a depth of knowledge and experience in dealing with this sort of human interaction. They're swamped. Later on, I will talk about a case that big city, Dallas, Texas. There was a homicide, subsequently ruled self-defense. The homicide squad that caught that case had 13 homicides that week. When they arrived on the scene to do the initial investigation, they had been awake for over 24 hours. Sleep deprivation is akin to intoxication. The system was breaking down. I will offer this bit of advice, however. If you find yourself in this circumstance, think about what I just told you, how assets are what they are, and they're allocated across a department or agency. It would behoove you to hire your own private investigator. This is someone that will go ask that the ATM across the way, did the officers come and check this out? No, they didn't. Oh, look, there is exculpatory video evidence of the shooting that my client was involved in. You want your own advocate investigating. I'm not meaning to cast aspersions, but when agencies, and I've spent a long time in government, tend to get swamped, they tend to throw things into bins. And here's this. Oh, boss says no more overtime this week. Or dang, let's pick this up tomorrow. I have to go and catch my kid's ball game. Bureaucracy and humanity mesh. Then you have the interview room, and these are designed to have a psychological impact. You'll have typically just the one light. Some of them are a bit more cheerful now. 3 chairs, one for the interviewee, formerly known as the interrogation room, and then 2 chairs for officers. And you might note that to get out of the room, you have to pass the chairs where the officers would be sitting. You're already kind of in a corner. Now, tricks, they got them. During the Zimmerman investigation, there's video on YouTube, you can look this up. George Zimmerman was in the interview room, rather disheveled and he had a pretty bad night. Officer came in, and he said, George, my partner has just informed me there is video of your event. Do you want to change your statement? There was no video. That was a lever to get him to move off of this statement. Zimmerman's response was, thank God. Because in his mind at that moment, any video of that event would have been exculpatory. And I'm sure we all know about the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin shooting from way back in the day, 10 years, give or take. Time's moved on. Let me back up. They can lie to you, straight up, flat out lie, as a technique. The Supreme Court said it's okay. The silent treatment. They'll lock you in your room for 3 or 4 hours and watch you. Then they may abruptly enter the room and start bombarding you with questions. That is generally not the approach they'll take. They'll come in and say, hi, I'm Officer so-and-so. This is my partner. We're going to talk to you about this case. What can you tell me about these events? Calm and cool. And then, if they so choose, they can dial it up. And the interview can become more of an interrogation. It can become much more adversarial. And then sure enough, one of those cops like, hey, Bob, chill out for a second. You can talk to me. And what do we have now? The classic good cop, bad cop. Help me help you. I come from a family, we've had law enforcement in the family. I was raised to support and the police and give them a hand, whatever, and I still do. But I have to recognize I have just stepped through the looking glass. And at this point, I have to look out for my own interest. We will discuss, during the course of the class, I discuss asserting your constitutional rights and making a brief statement and shutting up, or just plain flat out shutting up. Here's my ID card, I want my lawyer. Once you've invoked your constitutional rights, ethical officers and agencies will leave you alone. I got news. They may try to pull a thing. Or you can be put into a cell. Now you're probably in a jail, you're not in prison, you haven't been determined guilty yet. And you sit in the cell, and then there's a guy that comes in and sits down next to you. What are you in for? Well, blah, 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 blah. Okay, great. That guy that sat down next to you was a police officer. Or when you enter the cell, there's an inmate in there already. What are you in for? And you don't tell him anything. But he may be aware of your case. Or you do tell him something. And in regard, for a Snickers bar and a phone call, I'll tell you what he told me about his case. Shut up means shut up. So while the investigation is going on, you're in the cooler. And at some point, hopefully, your lawyer will you have a lawyer now, interceding on your behalf, and maybe you've bonded out, or maybe you're held in pretrial detention for God knows how long. That case I mentioned in Dallas was 8 months pretrial detention and then $1 million bond. More on that coming. Do we recognize the movie? Great Escape. In the cooler. However long it takes, the investigation is wrapped up and completed and presented to the local prosecutor. Now, I am told most prosecution offices have a review process to pick things apart to look for holes. Because it's important to get this right before you levy charges on a citizen. Sometimes things fall through, or personalities, politics, and agendas take hold. And now we have the prosecutor, the people's representative. In the adversarial system, they're the voice of the victim. And it's a pretty important job, because when you unleash the power of the state on a citizen, which is what they do, warrants, motions, the whole 9 yards, it's a position of great power and authority. Prosecutors depend upon the jurisdiction. Some are elected, some are appointed. Both of them, then there's already then a political element involved in prosecutions. Who did the appointing? Who did the electing? I'm kind of a big fan of elected prosecutors myself, but that's just it's where we are. Again, it's jurisdictionally dependent. They have lots of resources compared to an average USA of American citizen. Not all agencies have unlimited resources. They will make decisions to apportion, and that's part of the prosecutorial process, apportion what against what cases. They will pursue justice, ideally. Prosecutors are people too. They will do everything they can to impeach your claim of self-defense when you go before a jury. They like to win. It looks good to have a high conviction rate. Before most trials, they might make a plea deal. Hey, look, we will move you down to manslaughter if you agree with 10-year sentence with parole and it's wheeling and dealing. It works. And most of the time, when you're dealing with a system that the majority of the people are guilty of what they're being charged of, it makes a lot of sense, because I mentioned earlier the system is being swamped. There's only so many assets to allocate. They are rarely censured for prosecutorial misconduct. The one time I can think of was about a decade ago. It was a case, the North Carolina rugby players. That was pretty bad. And if I recall, that guy, he might even caught some prison time for that, some jail time. They will make deals. It's the art of the deal. They've only got so many prosecutors to cover their jurisdiction and wide cases. Ooh, this is a pretty important case. Over here, I can cut some slack to this person. This is the first offender. And they wheel in the deal with the defense attorneys. They have some tricks, too. During the pretrial process, there's a thing called discovery, where both sides show their cards. Well, certainly the prosecution. We have all of this on your client. There are laws that mandate this. Well, shockingly enough, sometimes papers just fall into that file. You might recall during the Rittenhouse case, during the course of the trial, suddenly video appeared, which the prosecution had the whole time. The way that video was presented to the defense was a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. You couldn't tell bupkis from it. Some jurisdictions will take multiple bites at the apple. First, the process will go through a grand jury. And they will keep going back before that grand jury until they finally get an indictment. And then in some cases, I can cite several, one out in California, which is just horrific. They had multiple trials until finally the prosecution moved for a change of venue, and they moved the trial to the victim's hometown and gained a conviction. It was a wrongful conviction. The guy did 11 years. Evidence was withheld. Evidence was mishandled by the LA County sheriffs. It was a debacle. And the guy got out after 11 years in the pokey. They can make outlandish assertions because they will develop a theory of the case. If they will throw something against the wall and see what will stick with a jury. It's the defense's job, of course, to bat that back. And we'll talk about those guys in a second. Innocence is a defense. It really is. I'll talk about the outliers. Malicious prosecution is also a thing. Prosecutorial misconduct is also a thing. It happens. Do whatever you can to not be a cause celeb. Again, if you employ force, you must be absolutely justified. You don't have to be right, but you have to be reasonable in your application of that force. Defense attorneys. I should have had a picture of a Superman cape here for this one. Criminal defense attorneys. It would behoove you to buy local, because the local law enforcement community, local justice establishment, they all know each other. And this person will know the lay of the land. Now, if you find yourself in those big mega cases, well, you might have to hire like a Johnny Cochran or something like that. Also note how criminal is underlined. Not all lawyers practice criminal law. Some do family court. Some do intellectual property rights. There's all kinds of aspects of the law, and what you want is a ding-dang barracuda, preferably a defense attorney that spent some time as a prosecutor, who knows the ins and the outs, knows the lay of the land, knows the tricks. You want somebody who routinely gets guilty people off. And, oh, there he is now. If it does not fit, you must acquit. Remember, they're experienced in defending criminals. You might find a defense attorney having received a plea deal offer from the prosecutor, like, hey, you know what? 5 years in the slam isn't so bad. And plus, you'll be out in a year and a half with good behavior. I think we should take this deal. Otherwise, you go to court, and suddenly you get the full money, the full 10 or 15 years. It's all going to depend upon you and the legal representation you have and what you do. Remember, these people are used to defending criminals, of which we are not. They will advocate for your narrative of events. I did this, I did that, he did this, I did that, back and forth. I made this decision because this evidence supports these claims. They'll have a narrative of events, and so will the prosecution have their own narrative of events. Attorney and client privilege is a thing. It is a sacrosanct foundation of American law. Be very mindful, however, of what you say where when you're talking with your attorney. I've got some nightmare stories of, that phone call you make is recorded. And it's just, it's where we are. Have I mentioned that these are people? And it's bureaucracies full of humans. Now then, here comes the judge. Here we are in the Rittenhouse trial. Yet another box of chocolates. Variety of experience, variety of education and application of the law, and judicial outlook. Now, you want to know a thing about judges? They're people too. Over there, that is a picture of of various judges arrested for DWI. About 2 months ago in Orange County, California, a judge texted his staff, essentially, hey, I just killed my wife. I don't think I'll be coming in today. Shockingly enough, alcohol was involved. He got a $2 million bond, apparently under flight risk. Again, elected or appointed. Subject to judicial review. The decisions they make during the course of a trial, during the appeals process, can be reviewed. Do judges always get it right? No. Your Honor, the decider. The judge decides bail, or a judge, not necessarily your trial judge. It decides the law and how it's presented and applied in your case before that jury. He or she decides what is admissible evidence. Will rule on motions, motion to suppress, motion to allow. Who will be allowed in as an expert witness? Who won't? What evidence will be allowed and shown to the jury? What background data will be shown to the jury? They will issue the jury instructions. They will issue the sentence. Juries, holy cow. It's become a thing when there is an industry now based upon jury selection in major trials. There are jury experts that will sit in the trials and advise on who you want on your jury or not. Jury of your peers. So let's talk about, in this particular case, show of hands, who has been to 2 or more shooting or self-defense classes? All the hands are up. 3, 4, 5, all right? And look, your average juror has not been to 1. Many of you on the jury pool may look at gun ownership, let alone concealed carry, rather askance. And there's a saying, a jury consists of 12 people that are so stupid they couldn't even come up with an excuse to get out of jury duty. Which is sad. The system doesn't work if we try to dodge it. And then you get, some less than stellar outcomes. 2 types of juries. The grand jury. They determine the justification for a criminal trial. Selected by judges. Conduct their deliberations in secret. They have subpoena power. You can be subpoenaed before a grand jury. However, you cannot be compelled to testify against yourself. You can plead the Fifth Amendment. There is no defense representation in that room with you. You can ask for a halt, go out and consult with your lawyer, but your lawyer is not going to be in that room. Now, this is going to change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In California, the prosecution must present exculpatory evidence to the grand jury. Other jurisdictions, they don't have to do that. That helps the grand jury make a decision. What's going on here? Our goal is a no true bill or not an indictment. If you get billed, then you've been indicted. The trial jury will determine guilt or innocence. The trial or petite jury, small jury, grand, petite. Voir dire, very dire. This is the process by which jurors are selected. And we're back to the judge. You can have a challenge process. Some jurors can be dismissed out of hand. I don't like this color of his hair. I like his shirt. And he's out. He's wearing a, kill them all, let God sort them out t-shirt in a murder trial. Nope, don't need him. Other jurors can be dismissed or disallowed by what they do during the course of the trial. Preemptory challenge, like, nope, don't want him. Or challenge by exception. Their decisions must be unanimous. All vote for guilty. If you've got one hangs out, well, then it's a hung jury, and we'll cover that in a second. Jury tampering is a thing. Recently, there was a trial on the West Coast, and during the course of the trial, the defense attorney, who was representing clients accused of violence, made a comment to the jurors. And she said, I am one of these people, and I see all of your faces. There's no other way to interpret that. It's a human condition. And that's just one of many examples. Some jurors are there for the fame and fortune. Get on the big trial, the big jury, and then I get my 15 minutes of fame at the end of it. The verdict is rendered. There being no, Your Honor, we find the defendant not guilty. Boom. There being no further business before this court, we're done. Get on with what's left of your life. That gentleman I talked about earlier, that $1 million bail, that's $100,000. Out of his retirement fund, out of his family business. Gone. 8 months of his life, gone. You're in that jail contemplating that this could be my existence for the remainder of my natural born days. I'll say it again, it has got to be worth it. Get your property returned. Well, maybe not after a period of time. Good luck with that. It may be a year or two in the locker with your sweat and blood or whatever on it can come back as a rust bucket. I'll talk about a case later where they just disappeared in the system. And don't be surprised if your stuff just disappears in the system. Oh, and don't be surprised if you were found not guilty and you are now suddenly a family's reason to exist. We want justice for so-and-so. They hound you on social media. They go after your employer. We demand justice for our fill in the blank. Don't be surprised if that doesn't happen to you. The guilty verdict. Remanded to custody, right then and there. Boom, off you go. If you were on a pretrial release, they hook you up and haul you off. If you are already an inmate, then they cart you back behind and off you go, and off to jail, and then you hang out and wait for sentencing. Now, a lot of sentences in this country, particularly federal trials, because during the 70s, 80s, it was so bad they started just giving sentencing guidelines, where the judge's hands are tied. That can become a thing. You catch your sentence. And then you begin the appeals process. And in an episode of Law & Order, well, the crime, the investigation, the conviction, the trial, all in 45 minutes with commercials. Reality, you can be in prison now for years while your appeal goes through the system. Years. The verdict or not, well, you can have a mistrial. And one result, you can have a hung jury, or you can have a procedural error where the judge has to cancel everything and say, okay, we're going to do this again. Now, that will be a prosecutorial decision, whether or not to take another bite at your apple, to borrow a phrase. Though I may have personalized it just a bit much there. He crossed state lines. Does anybody remember that from the Rittenhouse trial? Utterly irrelevant statement, but it was repeated time and time again. It didn't matter. There is a geographic component to the law. You got big city thinking, and you come out here and you ain't from around here kind of things. And it's just going to be different. The pace will be different, the application will be different, the results can be the same. In some jurisdictions, you've got the complainant. Others are referred to as the plaintiff. And there are all kinds of various terminology that may be different. Think about this. If you are traveling across country, you should be aware of what laws are what as you go from state to state. But think about this. In some states, you can cross a county line and be subjected to an entirely different legal environment. In some departments, the response you get from that agency will depend not just from department to department, but from agency to agency, shift to shift. Who's on what shift will do what during the investigation of a case. Again, I will say this, the system has been swamped, particularly in big cities. As I speak to you right now, there have been more than 200 homicides in our nation's capital this year. They get about a 35% closure rate on those cases. Chicago is a nightmare. I could go on and on. We're witnessing some interesting times. The country has seen this before. The local political environment. Politicians, people are policy. Politicians hire sheriffs or chiefs of police. They set the departmental policies. And the politicians are elected by who? The people. If you want to defund the police, that's great. But if in 2 or 3 years after doing that, things turn to crap, look to yourselves. Voters are getting what they asked for, good and hard. The media will pee in the jury pool. During the Rittenhouse trial, there was an example when the media followed the jury van to the release point with the intention of then following those individual jurors to their homes, looking for an interview. Or during the pre-trial phase, they do all the hyperbole, all the crazy attention line getting stuff, and it's all wrong. But what they're doing is they're actually muddying up the jury pool waters. They're poisoning those waters. And that can also take into account the judicial system. It kind of has an impact on the presumption of innocence, I think. And yet, freedom of speech, I'm all about it. Insurance. Prepaid legal defense funds. Let the buyer beware. You really can't call it insurance because you cannot insure against an intentional act. And using lethal force or any kind of force on someone is an intentional act. Do your due diligence, check these various companies out there, and buy the best you can get. Right now, I've got Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. There are other companies out there. I'm a big ACLDN fan. Caveat emptor. And here's an example of the luxury accommodations that can await you in a jail. Nightmares. Wrapping this up. Philadelphia freedom. Some years ago, I was on an internet forum and encountered a story from a guy who was, at the time, a law student in Philadelphia. He was working at a legal aid center, and he came down the steps, and he was accosted by a guy with a section of hacksaw blade. Well, our defender merely flashed his gun, said, "My sig trumps your hacksaw blade," and the guy ran off. So he's walking down the street thinking, this is great. Another defensive gun use with no shots fired. When suddenly, woo, Philadelphia PD arrived and they arrest him. They disarm him, they confiscate from him his concealed carry permit. They go to his apartment and confiscate all of his guns. They take him down for an interrogation, interview. He tells his story. Well, we're going to charge you anyway. So it goes back and forth over the ensuing year. Now, a law school student back in the 80s, even a law school student was smart enough to know he needs to hire a defense attorney. A good defense attorney back then wouldn't answer the phone probably for less than $150 an hour. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Over the course of the year, the street person never showed up for the depositions. I missed a point. During the interview, they said, hey, where's your permit? Well, you have it. We don't have it. No, you guys check it. We don't have it. Carry it without a permit. Yes, they did. Back and forth, back and forth. Charges are eventually dismissed. And he's like, okay, I want my guns back. We don't have your guns. No, I have a receipt. We don't have your guns. So they had to keep that lawyer on retainer to sue the city of Philadelphia for the cost of his now missing firearms. Lord knows where they went. Years later, I talked to this guy again on the interwebs, and he confirmed this story, and he added a couple an interesting information bit to it. This whole event was so stressful that it became a significant contributing factor to his divorce. As I mentioned in class, these are highly consequential decisions and actions that you're taking. Zimmerman. Okay, so I will not laud him as a hero, but I will say this. At the point his head was getting bounced off that cement, lethal force was a rational, reasonable option. He fired that one shot. During the course of that trial, during the investigation, his defense team said, hey, we want a picture and the video of when Zimmerman came into the Sally Port into the agency. Sure, we'll get you that. Weeks go by. Hey, we want that. Yeah, we'll get that to you from the prosecution. Your Honor, the prosecution is withholding evidence. Okay, here you go. And they submitted to the defense a black and white photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. You couldn't even really tell it was Zimmerman. No, we want the real deal. Finally, they released the real deal, and there's Zimmerman's face all messed up with his nose pushed out of joint. Would that tend to buttress the defense claim? Yes, it would. Texas, it's a whole other country. I taught a class down there a few years ago, and in the class I had an attorney who was a defense attorney at the appellate level for death penalty cases in Texas. I'm like, this is going to be an interesting class. And I said, surely they must be very forthcoming on discovery, right? Because the greatest power the state has is to deprive a citizen of his life. I need the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And I said, surely discovery must be easy. Like, oh no, I have to fight for every little thing. It's the state of the play. Now, I alluded to earlier a circumstance in Texas. I spoke to a defense expert. A gentleman violated John Farnham's rules of stupid. He went to a stupid place at a stupid time that was full of stupid people, and he did a stupid thing. He went to an unlicensed after-hour drinking establishment, ran afoul of the people there, was getting the living snot beat out of him, fought his way back out to his truck, retrieved a firearm, was holding the crowd back. Somebody else fired shots. Our defendant emptied his magazine, 8 rounds, got into his truck, called 911, and fled the scene while being pursued by the people that were going to beat him to death. He gets to his home in another jurisdiction. The police of that jurisdiction arrive. I've seen the pictures. His ear is hanging by a thread. His face is bloodied. He had had the living crap knocked out of him. He went into the system. He was anesthetized and then interviewed by that detective squad. Well, what did they tell you? Don't make any decisions for 3 days after you've had anesthesia, things like that. Well, now he's on trial, and he's talking to this detective, and it turns adversarial. Bam. And they charge him. Those 8 shots he fired killed 2 people, wounded 2 others. One of the people wounded was the El Jefe of that particular establishment, who fled to Mexico. He had multiple warrants and bonds on him. The prosecution made a deal. All that will go away if you come back and testify in this case. And he did. Why wouldn't he? During the course of the trial, The 911 tape, I remember I mentioned the guy fled the scene, calling 911, although they couldn't find the recording. Remember how in class I mentioned that's part of the evidentiary chain here too as well? There were a number of really, really bad investigatory errors. All the video wasn't collected, which was purely exculpatory. It went to trial. 8 months pretrial confinement, then that $1 million bond. He bonds out, trial, goes to the jury, 2 hours and 2 minutes later, they came back with a not guilty verdict. Think about the impact that those previous 8 months had, or 8 months of confinement had. That's $100,000 out of his family's life gone. Highly consequential decisions. Where you go, who you see, what you do. And it's not necessarily Texas. And by the way, that prosecutor was funded by a well-known person who funds prosecutors across the country. I'm not going to use the name here, but I think we all know who I'm talking about. The Rittenhouse trial. Holy cow. Summer of 2020, I took Masada Youb's lethal force instructor class. And in that course, we had a moot court. In that moot court, Moss had a presentation on, these are tricks that the prosecution will use to get a conviction when they have a weak case. So at this time frame, I had some surgery done on my foot. I'm recovering. I'm drinking some scotch maybe, and watching this trial. And if I would have drank every time they hit one of Moss's points, I would still be buzzed. Withheld evidence, modified evidence, misrepresented the law to the jury. My favorite, though, was when Rittenhouse testified. Who's the best witness on your behalf? You. And at the outset, the prosecutor said, Mr. Rittenhouse, this is the first we've heard from you since the night in question. The judge, stop, dismiss the jury. And then delivered what can only describe as a judicial bitch slap to that prosecutor. It has been established law in this country for over 50 years, vis-a-vis Miranda, things of that nature. He doesn't have to say, but he was being impugned before the jury for exercising his Fifth Amendment right. And then the lawyer said, he used one of those lawyer terms I love, why, Your Honor, I thought you opened the door. I did, for me, was the response. It was pretty brilliant. He might have wanted to ask before he went there. The right of self-defense was on trial there. Rittenhouse had a $2.4 million defense fund. He had the best. When you watch his interviews, he was in a jail cell, I forget for how many weeks, with no shower. When he finally bonded out, the first trip was to a hotel room to hose him down because he stank that bad. Homework. Self-defense and related state laws. Have a hard look at the judicial system of where you live and how they operate. Adopt the avoidance, deselection, and departure lifestyle. I think the first book that Masada Youb published was entitled In the Gravest Extreme. Keep that as your watchword as you go through your life armed. You can change your life in a second and end somebody else's. And that will reverberate throughout the remainder of your time on this planet. Some advice. Stay out of the meat grinder unless you absolutely have to defend yourself. Have a plan to be ejected from that system as quickly as you can. Innocence is a fine one. Excellent representation is a good one. If you can put a lawyer on retainer first, now have a good conversation, that's the kind of person that you want when that phone call comes in at 4 o'clock in the morning. That guy will be pounding on the police department's door, let me in, I want to see my client. My client has evoked all of his rights. Bam, bam, bam. I am such a believer in the adversarial system. And just People are people. And you entered a bureaucracy chock full of people. The bottom line, chock full. I recommend that you attend Masada Youth's Mag 20 Citizens Rules of Engagement course. And read Andrew Bronca's The Law of Self-Defense. I recommend handgunlaw.us is a really, really good website that whenever I reside in a particular state, I know there's been a change to the law, like Virginia changes the law on the 1st of July. I will go to that website at 12 a.m. on the 1st of July, 12:01, and the new law is up. It's pretty good. Consult a local criminal defense attorney. And that's all I got. Are there any questions? Lovely. Thank you very much.